A lot of us know Manny. We're co-op members of the organization. We're a colleague of Manny, but there's a lot that I think Manny is not recognized for in the context of how great Manny Steil is, Dr. Manny Steil. He is instrumental in having an impression and an influence and being a mentor on so many people. He is so committed to the National Speakers Association on a national level and our local chapter. He's served on the board, he's been an advisor, he's given direction to the organization, and he's had a tremendous impact on some of the great speakers that you've seen. Minnesota is the source of 3 national presidents of the National Speakers Association. Everybody remember Mike McKinley, Mark LeBlanc, and Tom Wininger. Manny has had an influence on all those people. I think all of them would consider Manny to be a mentor, to be an influence on their greatness, and you're able to see the evidence of Manny's impact on their lives and their contribution and their messages that they share with so many people. Manny is recognized across the country, across the world, for the content, for his listening, for his commitment, and for his inspiration and his impact. And I'm really grateful. And if we could all stand and welcome Manny to the front of the room as we deliver a fabulous presentation. Thank you, Manny.
Well done. The other day I sent Scott Plum 4 extensive introductions, background, history, and forwarded them to him, and he said, what am I going to do with all of this material? And I said, keep it short. Thank you, Scott. You know, it's both a pleasure, but it's really a privilege to be here today and actually see smiling faces. You know, the opportunity to get together, the opportunity to talk in the hallway, the opportunity to actually connect names with faces is a very, very rich opportunity in my mind. And so I'd like to share with you today a very simple little message. I invite you to take notes. I know Mike Gregory well. Mike is the great note taker of the group. And I like to talk simply about understanding the forces that drive people. You know, we take a look at the Optimist Creed, we take a look at the various things that drive every member of the Optimists. And by the way, Kurt, I can't be here Saturday, but I will extend our services along the riverbanks of the Eagle River. I'll be cleaning that up as well, okay? And I'll see if I can recruit some people to do that. But at any rate, when you take a look at the character count, you take a look at all the forces that we abide by, that we say this is important, this is what we believe in, and so forth. I'm fully aware that we're not all the same. We're not all the same. When I think of specific people in this organization and think about the forces that drive them, I know that we're not all the same. So when we talk about the forces that drive us, what I'd like to have you do today, I like to build things around pyramids, triangles, things that rise from the foundation to the pinnacle point. And I have a little concept I call the 5 magic steps to success. Do you have this one, Mike? It's a pyramid, the 5 magic steps to success, okay? And the 5 magic steps to success that I've discovered over 60 some years of speaking and consulting basically center around this. If you want to have great success, you start with the magic of the data. And when I talk about the magic of the data, basically I'm looking at what drives you individually. We have processes that we can identify the forces that drive people in terms of the emotional forces, the social forces, the rational forces, and so forth. We measure that. fact, I've measured that with tens and tens of thousands of people around the world. And when we take a look at the forces that drive people, we start with the data. I have a theory that says if you don't have to guess, don't. If you don't have to guess, don't. And so whether we're looking at ourselves or we're looking at other people that are critical to our interaction day in, day out, day after day, if you don't have to guess, don't. We also, by the way, can create profiles, if you will, of not only individuals, but also of positions, of jobs, of functions, of tasks. The group is doing a great job right now in looking at the next levels of leadership in the Roseville Optimist Club. And as we do that, wonderful people have stepped forward and have basically said, I'll take this responsibility, I'll take that responsibility, I'll take this responsibility, and so forth. And so the question in my mind becomes, all of those responsibilities we can describe. We can describe what the treasurer's job is. We can describe what the president's job is, and so forth and so on. And so the second question in my mind is simply this. If we have data about positions or functions or tasks, and if we have perspectives of individuals, data about people, the next question up on the pyramid is, what do we do with the magic of the fit? Do we have the right people in the fit? I was fortunate in my life because I married a lady years ago, my late wife, Deezy. It was a beautiful magic of the fit. She's been gone 9 years, and what I know very simply is there's a piece missing in many ways because we enjoyed the magic of the fit. She had strengths where I had weaknesses and limitations. I had strengths where she had weaknesses and limitations. But together, you take a look at the tasks at hand of marriage, raising children, working in our business. Like many of you, the magic of the fit was wonderful because she took care of things that were not in my wheelhouse. And I took care of things that were not in her wheelhouse. And as a consequence, we were stronger as a consequence. The next question, very simply, is what I call the magic of the mix. The magic of the mix. When we start mixing people together, we can start with the magic of the data, the magic of the profile of the positions, the magic of the fit, and then the magic of the mix. If you take a look at the Roseville Optimist Club and all of the other entities that we mix with, the real secret of our success is what do we accomplish together? Then you can talk. By the way, those three things, foundation, second level, third level. The fourth level is anything you want to talk about. You want to talk about leadership, you want to talk about communication, you want to talk about listening, you want to talk about, pick a topic, we can talk about it. But the pinnacle point is what I call the magic of results. The magic of results. Both for the individual and for the group, the organization, and so forth. Because that's where the rubber meets the road. But notice it all begins down with the magic of data. If you don't have to guess, don't. I'll give you one more little term that you might want to kick around, and that is oak trees don't grow bananas. Oak trees don't grow bananas. What we found is very often we ask people to do things that they aren't going to do or aren't going to do well, etc. I have two favorite philosophers. My first favorite philosopher is a guy by the name of Socrates. I tried to find his first name, but I could never find his first name. Good old Socrates. And Socrates said something that is so simple, so central to our individual and collective success. He said very simply, beyond all else, know thyself. Beyond all else, know thyself. And when we start talking about what drives each of us individually and then collectively, to what extent do we know thyself? And we'll talk a little bit about that today. In fact, it's interesting because getting together face to face, getting together at the round tables, getting together at the outreach programs and so forth provides an opportunity for each of us to look a little bit deeper inside ourselves. Know thyself. Above all else, know thyself. My second greatest philosopher that impresses me is a guy by the name of Dr. Manny Steil. Because he said something real simple. He said, beyond knowing thyself, secondly, above all else, know thy others. See, when I look at Don Salvaretta, I've had enough interaction with him since when, Don? 1970s, 70-something?
Way back.
Way back. And in the connection within the Optimist Club, Don hasn't changed a bit. Don is the same positive, go get it done, do it now. Let me make 7 more phone calls, guy. Let me read 100 more books. Let me tell you about this book, that book, etc. In fact, I'm proposing something publicly here today. I hope that the Optimist Club of Roseville can put together a legacy library of Don, for Don, in Don's name, because all those books that he has, it's going to be a task down the road. I can see a section in the Roseville Library or some other place that would basically be centered around the Salvaretta Memorial Library. Not rushing you to go, Don. But what I'm concerned about is how do we honor this man and all of the books for other people to read that he has read. And if you don't know all the books that he's read, spend an afternoon with him on his porch sometime and he'll tell you about this one, that one, another one, these 3, those 4, those 26, and so forth. So when we talk about understanding self and then understanding what drives other people, I want you to picture another triangle, if you will, another pyramid. And I'd like to talk about something that most of us don't think a lot about. We say, well, I know Darrell LeBaron. I've met him. I've been up on his roof at the fire station 19. We've sat by the pool and chatted about this. I know about his hunting. I know about the work that he's doing with youth in getting youth hunters out in the field. I know that about him. I know those things. I know he's from Austin, Minnesota, but we'll pass on that. Me being from Albert Lee, and so forth. But in this pyramid, what I want to know about myself and what I want to know about others is simply this. We call it the need-to dimension. We measure it out. We measure it out in a very concrete, specific, explicit, descriptive, numerical, quantitative kind of a fashion. What is the underlying force that drives each of us in a need-to dimension? And by need to, what I'm talking about very simply is this. It is the inborn, ingrained, inherent, instinctive, emotional force that drives us. And by the way, a lot of other people don't see it. A lot of people don't need it. The comment was made earlier today about operating under stress. Well, this is functional stress. This is good stress. Now, by the way, there's a negative stress, and that's another measurement that we can look at and describe and explain and discuss as well. But the need-to dimension basically is the inborn, ingrained, inherent, instinctive force that drives us. That was created when 2 people got together and we were created individually. Our blood type was established, the color of our eyes was established, the shape of our nose was established. I notice my ears are getting longer, but they pretty much look like my father's, my late father's, and so forth. And when we get under functional stress, The real question is, from a emotional survival perspective, when the rubber meets the road and the pressure is put upon us, how do we behave? What do we do? What's our activity level? Because until we fulfill or satisfy our inborn, ingrained, inherent, instinctive need tos, we don't move to a higher level. The next level up, in an ascending order, is what we call the ought to dimension. So we go from the need to that drives us to the ought to that drives us. And the ought to dimension, very simply, is taught, trained, learned, conditioned. It's the socialized force that drives us. When you are in your ought to dimension, you behave in a given way. By the way, it's all learned behavior. Neither good nor bad, it's just learned behavior. What do? How do you react? How do you deal with issues? How do you deal with opportunities and so forth? Well, what we know is that the socialized, conditioned force that drives us, important but not operative until our need tos are established. And by the way, our need to profile and our ought to profile can be the same profile. My need to dimension and my ought to dimension are very different. I engage in behavior and activity in a very different way when I'm in my ought to than I do when I'm in my need to dimension. By the way, no right, wrong, good, bad, etc. But people who know me well, people who lived with me, people who, my kids, my grandkids, etc., they all know when Papa is in his need to dimension versus when he's in his ought to dimension. How do they know that? They know what drives me on a multifaceted basis, and they watch the behavior. That's all. By the way, I understand when I'm in my ought to dimension versus when I'm in my need to dimension. And when our needs are established, fulfilled, we work with confidence. We automatically move to our ought to dimension when our ought tos are met. Remember, taught, trained, learned, conditioned, socialized forces that drive us. No right, wrong, good, bad. It is what it is. When we're there, we work in a cooperative fashion with other people in our own way, right? And when that's fulfilled, now we go to the pinnacle point of this pyramid, and we call that the like to dimension. This is the rational force that drives us. When we're in our like to dimension, we operate in a perspective that basically, when we're in the like to, we basically operate in a fashion, that's what I wanted to say, that illustrates what we like to do. That's where our strengths are. By the way, I would hope that everybody who takes on a task at the Optimist group make sure that they're in a position where they can do what they like to do, make sure their needs are fulfilled, get through the ought to dimension, and operate out of their like to dimension. I would guess, by the way, when we take a look at the Optimist makeup of the members across the board, that the like to is fairly well repeated over and over and over. Read the creed. Look at the other things that drive us, and so forth. And by the way, when we're in our like to dimension, we're at peak performance. The world stands still. It's not even work. We enjoy it. We plug along and do what we like to do because we like to do that. We're good at doing that. We're skilled at doing that, and so forth. But when our like to dimension is not fulfilled, is not satisfied, is not completed, then we get frustrated. And when we get frustrated, our strengths are blocked and we drop back down to our ought to dimension. So we're either ascending on the left-hand side or we're descending on the right-hand side. So we drop from our like to down to our ought to. In my case, my like to and my ought to are very, very similar. So I hardly even notice that because I plow through like to ought to on the descending side or on the ascending side as well. But when we can't do what we think we ought to do, or when other people don't do what we think they ought to do. It's a violation of our ought tos. We drop down to our need to dimension, and now our need tos, the security is upset, upended a bit. And now picture an upside down pyramid there, Mike. So we got an upside pyramid. When we get through the need to, we drop down into an upside down pyramid, and we've got two elements there, and they're all negative. So when we're in our distress level, so we go from the need to down to distress. And now this is insecurity, it's negative, it is learned behavior, it's not productive. We don't do ourselves or anyone else any favors there. It's not an area that any of us profit from spending much time in. And if we can't focus back on our need tos and move back up, we drop then down to the pit of the world. We drop down to severe distress. And now we're talking about dysfunctional behavior. Think about the people in your life, close people in your life. Think about the people in your life that you have seen them doing what they need to do, even though you didn't have maybe a measurement or a definition of their need to. Well, let's back up a step. First of all, let's go back to Socrates. Let's take a look at your own need tos, whatever those are. When our needs aren't fulfilled, we drop into distress, we engage in defensive behaviors. It's all learned behavior, it's all negative behavior. It doesn't do us or anybody else around us any good. And then if we don't focus back on our needs and move up, we drop one more step down into severe distress, and now we enter the world of dysfunctionality. It's ugly. It's not productive. No one around us enjoys it. Ever been there? Yes, we've all been there. Someone says, no, I've never been there. I'll talk to some people around you and ask them if have they ever been there. And they'll say, oh yeah, I can tell you this moment, etc. How many of you have kids? Ever see any of your kids drop into a defensive, dysfunctional behavior pattern? Hopefully, the only way out of that is to say, time out, let's focus on your needs. If you don't know what their needs are, well, then lots of luck. But they know what their needs are. So when you see people in distress, engage in negative, defensive behaviors, the answer is, the only door into that world is needs not met. The only way out of there is to focus on needs and help people move up. And if you've ever seen anybody in severe distress, engage in dysfunctional behavior, now you really need to call time out to say, stop. By the way, they don't listen then anyway, but well, they're in a dysfunctional position. But we need to help people pause and focus on their needs. Needs met, we move up. Ought tos met, we move up. Ought tos, like tos, the pinnacle point. If we don't stay there, we drop back to the ought to. If we don't serve there, we drop back down to the need to. If those aren't met, we turn the corner, we drop into distress, defensive, negative behavior. And if that's not fulfilled, we drop into severe distress, dysfunctional behavior. And every one of us in this room has made that journey, up or down, up or down. My wife and I have 3 children. At one point in time, I discovered the simple fact that I raised 3 kids as if they were one. My one. Okay? My wife raised all 3 kids as if they were one, her one. And after, this is many years ago, my wife and I had a great marriage. But at the 15-year mark, it got better, substantially and measurably better, because all of a sudden, each of us understood ourselves better, need to, ought to, like to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At about the age of 15, 16, when we discovered that each of us were raising 3 kids as if they were our ones, we dug a little deeper. And what we discovered is that the three kids were not, they didn't look alike. Oh, they looked alike, you know, but from an internal psychological perspective, they weren't alike. And so guess what we did? We started to treat them as their one. My son, driven in a very different way than our middle daughter, and very different from our youngest daughter. And as a consequence, as we dealt with them, remember the motto, above all else, know thyself. Secondly, above all else, know thy others. As we understood them, life got amazingly different. This was at about the age of 14, 15, 16 years old. It became positive, it became productive, there was less distress or severe distress. There was less dysfunctional behavior that we saw. Why? Not because we were brilliant, but because we understood ourselves better and because we understood each of them better. And when we start understanding people in a different way, after we understand ourselves first, remember Socrates, above all else, know thyself. Remember Manny Steil, who says, secondly, above all else, know thy others, the ones that are close to us. How many people do we have in the world? Anybody know?
7.8 billion.
7.8 billion people, roughly, give or take a couple. We'll never understand all of them, will we? How many people in your orbit that you deal with day in, day out, day after day, that you know, literally know? How many people do you think you really understand? None of them. No, we know people that we interact with day in, day out, day after day, over periods of time, people that we live with to a degree, people that we experience day in, day after day at our work, at our social world, and so forth. We have a good feel for those people, okay? Now, I'm not going to go deep in this, but if you want to put a note there, Mike, just a quadrant, 4-quadrant box. When we take a global look at personality types or what drives people, up in the upper left-hand corner, Mike, just put the word red. Upper right-hand corner, put the word yellow. Lower right-hand corner, put the word blue. And in the lower left-hand corner, put green. Now, by the way, we can measure this in a very quantitative fashion. We have a process. We ask people to answer 94 questions. We develop a 13-page individualized report. It's descriptive, it is quantitative, it is measurable in the sense that we can talk about what is the force. Remember the forces that drive people. So on a scale basis, we can basically take a look at the people from a score of 0 to 6 with half points possible. The red people. These are the people who like to act, they like to implement, they like to take action, they're pragmatic. I mean, we can give you a whole definition of these people, and we can talk to you about the extent to which these people behave in that fashion when they're in their need to dimension, or when they're in their ought to dimension, or when they're in their like to dimension, or negatively when they're in distress or severe distress. By the way, if you want a metaphoric word, just think about the word fire. These are hot, burning, on fire people. These are the people who love to make things happen. They like to move. They like to take action. Their approach is very direct. They don't beat around the bush. Their style is authoritative. They don't ask you, they tell you, and so forth. But the bottom line of a high red is to achieve short-term goals. Now, by the way, we can do this on a measurable fashion. 0, 0.5, 1, 1.52, da-da-da-da-da. So instead of talking in terms of generalities, we can measure the degree to which an individual is driven in the red fashion. The yellow are the people. There's a lot of yellow in this room, either in the need to or the ought to or the like to, or you wouldn't be here in some dimension. This is air. So we got red is fire, yellow is air. These are the people that love, they're very adaptive. They're always talking. They're great persuaders. Now, by the way, you can look at all that in a positive or a negative fashion, but the fact is, these are the people who are always organizing something. They're very sociable. Their approach in life is very democratic. They don't tell, they ask, so forth. Bottom line for a high yellow on a scale 0 to 6, with half points possible, is the high yellows are focused on achieving consensus. So we have those meetings talking about the future, the organizational structure, the people, the roles, and so forth. You give me a room full of yellows, and there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of conversation, there's no argument. They're focused on achieving consensus. So we got fire, we have air, then we've got the blue. The blue are the thinkers. The blues are the people who are always assessing, they're always planning, they're always gathering data. They're very contemplative. Their approach is consultative because they basically want more information and so forth. When we start talking about understanding the forces that drive people, critically important that in the blues, in the blue world, we have people who are focused on achieving understanding. That's the bottom line for a high blue. A low blue doesn't care. Low blue says, hey, come on, let's go, get to the point. I don't need more information, and so forth. But a high blue takes time, they gather information, they're individualistic. See, I love blue-reds for some things, because blue-reds, all you have to say to them is, hey, we got a problem, go figure it out and get on the horse and take care of it. But if you say to a high blue-red, hey, we've got a group that we're gathering and we're going to sit around and we're going to talk about this forever and we're going to figure it out. I watch them, the blue-reds, their eyes just glaze over. And they say, I think I'm in the wrong room or the wrong group. By the way, blue is water, so we got fire, air, water. And then we get to green, and green is good old Mother Earth, terra firma. The greens are the analyzers. These are the controllers. These are the people who love to monitor. They're more reserved in their nature. Everything is structured for a high green. They want the 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, et cetera, et cetera. You know them. Your accountant probably is a little bit like that. Or an engineer, if you're dealing with engineers, are a little bit like that. I don't know what architects are like, but no, they're creative. They're creative. How many churches, Don? 690 churches he's as an architect that he's developed in his professional world, right? I'm close.
Too many.
Too many, okay. 650. So, see, a high green would know that exactly.
659. No.
659. and a low green wouldn't care. Yeah, who cares? I bet they're pretty. I bet they're nice. I bet the people enjoy them, and so forth. My point about this is, if you look at the need to dimension, we can create database that identifies specifically what drives a person from an inborn, ingrained, inherent, instinctive force. When I discovered at 15 years of a wonderful marriage that my beautiful late wife had no yellow in her need to dimension, but she had 5.5 blue, and she had red, and she had green. By the way, she was a musician. She was a pianist. But she needed her space. I would come home at night sometimes, and I'd drive in the garage, and I would hear the piano being played in the living room. And I would walk in, and she would stop. And I would say, no, 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 no. Continue, I love it. She said, no, I don't have this one, I don't have this right yet. Beethoven wrote it a different way. I need to have it right. I got to the point that I wouldn't drive into the garage. I would stop out on the street, and I would creep around the backside and sit on the deck and listen to her play the piano, because I love to hear her play the piano. But as a piano teacher, as a individual who was so skilled, she needed to have every note right. Even though she performed for governors and all that kind of stuff. But you know the type, right? Some of you. Other people would say, hey, I'll sit down and play the piano. I don't care about Beethoven. Who was he? What was his, did he play or did he just compose? What was he? They wouldn't care, okay? So as you start to think a little bit, this is generality today. I understand that. Understand the forces that drive yourself and other people. It starts with self first. In your need to, in your ought to, in your like to dimension. Are you a high on the action side, high on the people side, high on the information side, high on the control side, the analytic side? By the way, we're not high on all those, because when you look at the calculus of this, what we discover is that the highest you can be in any of those on a scale of 0 to 6 is 6, and when you add them all up, you can't be 6, 6, 6, 6. But you could be 3, 3, 3, 3, which is pretty centralized. I never say balanced, because that means some of us are unbalanced. And I learned a long time ago, people don't like to be called unbalanced. By the way, you then can cluster this stuff, and I can talk to you more about that at another time. But when you take a look at the combination of the red-yellows versus the blue-greens, the red-yellows are the action, people-oriented. The blue-greens, those blue-greens are the internal people. They're the idea, organizational type of people. And here's the beauty, in my opinion. My opinion, that's all. The beauty is that we need all kinds of people in our world. We need all kinds of people. When we get overbalanced with all high reds and no blue greens, or all blue greens but no high red yellows, we have limitations in our world. We can also take a look at the cluster of the yellow blues versus the red greens. If we get nothing but red greens, boy, we get a lot of action, and it's very specific. But if we get all yellow blues, it's all friendly, and it's interesting, and it's creative, and so forth. And then, of course, as I said before, red blues, these are the independent, individualistic people. The yellow greens are the ones who last the longest in organizations, because they're good with people and they follow the rules. And so if the job calls for that, that's what they do. So when we take a look at our organization, I thought heavily about this, that when we take a look at the creed is tipped to a certain kind of individual in the Optimist Club. When we take a look at the other activities that we're involved in, each of them are tipped a little bit relative to the makeup of the people in those organizations. That's not an issue unless what? Not an issue unless we don't understand it. If we understand it, then we offset a little bit by adapting, bringing more people in, balancing things out, and building our organization in a more inclusive, collective kind of fashion. And then making sure that we understand what drives people and we get them in the right roles within the organization. You see, Kurt, you're going to get a ton of people out there with a rake, okay? You're going to get a bunch of people out there with a rake who are just going to lean on the rake. But they're going to be wonderful people, and they're going to lighten up the group and so forth, right? And they'll all have a good time, and when all is said and done, they'll say, "Man, that was a great gathering." Okay, I hope you have some high reds and high greens out there, and then the place will look pristine. Okay. And then the yellows can jabber away and come up with a better, they'll come up with a better way to do it. How about that? You know, we should have done this, we should have started here, we should have done this in a semicircle fashion, and so forth. So as we take a look at what drives the world, what drives people, I would simply say the most important thing that any of us can do is to start with self. What are the forces that drive me on a multi-dimensional, quantitative, descriptive kind of fashion? And then secondly, my approach in life is, how do we then look at the people in our orbit, the people who are in our close circle? What drives them on a multi-dimensional basis? Burlington Northern Railroad, I profiled 1,810 people, starting with the number 2 guy, starting with the intermodal division, starting with the auto division, starting with the chemical division, starting with the coal division, and so forth. They knew what drove the individuals in that organization and made sure that they had them in the right position of leadership and the right collective subgroups within that organization. As a consequence, when they had challenges to deal with, they had a challenge with aluminum, Alcoa aluminum. It was a several $million issue. By the way, when they went to fix it, we went into Alcoa aluminum and looked for 2 people. We didn't know who the people were, we just knew this was the task at hand, and there were 2 kinds of people that they needed to get on board. We profiled them out, they got those people, along with some of their suppliers, and all of a sudden the multi-million-dollar issue was resolved. Why? Because they had the right people in the right job, doing the right thing, understanding each other, and fulfilling the task. I could tell you scores of those kinds of stories, but time doesn't permit, because I see right now you're anxious. He's anxious because he's looking at the clock, and I'm astute enough to see that. And so I'm going to ask very simply, any questions that any of you might have? 3 questions. Yes, sir.